Europe is no longer Washington's primary center of gravity. The shift has been ongoing for a while. It is structural, not temporary. It means that Europe must step up. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney hit the nail on its head in his own speech in Davos. It's time also for Europe to take down its sign. To acknowledge that this tectonic shift is here to stay and act with urgency. The US setting its sights abroad and beyond Europe, NATO needs to become more European to maintain its strength, and for that, Europe must act. Anonymity is also used by some as a bargaining tool, and it cannot be that one country's veto defines the policy for others. Dear colleagues, dear friends, dear guests, it's a pleasure to be here today as we need to prepare ourselves for the future. Indeed, the crisis we face has deepened dramatically during the past year. As we get close to the marking of 4 years of Russia's war against Ukraine, we are fending off cyber attacks, sabotage against critical infrastructure, foreign interference and information manipulation, military intimidation, territorial threats, and political meddling. And it has become painfully clear that Russia will remain a major security threat for the long term. The Middle East has lived through a year of relentless crisis, from conflicts in Yemen, Syria and Gaza to protests in Iran. The only certainty now is that the region will remain completely unpredictable. China, too, remains a long-term challenge. It poses a risk to our economic model, threatens countries in the East and South China Seas, and supports Russia's war against Ukraine. In this regard, China is not the only one. As President Zelensky underlined in Davos last week, Russia can only continue to build weapons and pay for them thanks to imports of critical parts and continuing oil sales. If we want to stop the war, we must cut Russia off from both. Arguably, the biggest change in the fundamental reorientation is going on across the Atlantic, a rethinking that has shaken the transatlantic relationship to its foundation. Let me be very clear. We want strong transatlantic ties. The US will remain Europe's partner and ally, but Europe needs to adapt to new realities. Europe is no longer Washington's primary center of gravity. The shift has been ongoing for a while. It is structural, not temporary. It means that Europe must step up. No great power in history has ever outsourced its survival and survived. These developments put a severe strain on the international norms, rules and the institutions enforcing them that we have built over 80 years. The risk of full-blown return to coercive power politics, spheres of influence and a world where might makes right is very real. Since we last spoke here, the virus has started to spread. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney hit the nail on its head in his own speech in Davos. It's time also for Europe to take down its sign. To acknowledge that this tectonic shift is here to stay and act with urgency. When I was a schoolgirl in Estonia, before anyone had mobile phones in their pocket, many schools used the bell system to tell you the time. The first bell was a signal to go to the class, the second bell was a warning, and the third bell meant that you were late and there would be consequences. We are now dangerously close to the third bell. Before that third bell actually rings, we need to inject a sense of urgency into our efforts in 4 areas. The first, and arguably most important of these, is defense. We need the capabilities to deter and defend. You all know the diagnosis. There is lack of complementarity of capabilities in Europe. We are too focused on national interest to tackle fragmentation in a serious way. Fragmentation makes us slow. It makes us weak. We need to change the culture away from thinking like nations towards acting jointly as Europeans. In areas including investment, development, procurement, maintenance, training, the full circle. Our defence spending is rising, which is good, but Europe lacks a number of strategic enablers, which are often too costly or complex for any one single member state to develop alone. So it is not only about how much we spend, but whether we spend it wisely and to maximum effect. We must also strike the right balance between innovation and traditional systems. Warfare is evolving fast. Capabilities that are used today might be outdated tomorrow. We need to put our militaries in a position of strength. Or put simply, we must be able to win the fight tonight and be ready tomorrow. Fortunately, there is no shortage of ideas of how to address each of these, and we have already made a lot of progress. Just think, white paper, the defence readiness roadmap, 9 capability targets, priorities led by the member states. But addressing the capability shortfalls also means posing some rather tricky questions. What geopolitical role do we want Europe and the EU to play? Can we identify a set of European NATO capability targets for which the EU can then support the development? Could we also think about establishing EU military capabilities that would be financed and owned by the member states? These and other sensitive subjects require political debate and action. The second priority area for action is defence industry. Here, quite a lot is happening. We are already setting the conditions for the industry to flourish, and I'm sure that my good colleague Andris Kubilius will address these in details in a few minutes when he speaks. But here I will just flag that what we see is a slow-motion ramp-up. There is a long list of areas where we are already acting, but where there is an urgent need to do more in order to reach a turning point. We need to fill our gaps first and foremost, but we also need to stand before another huge task, to support Ukraine with €60 billion in military aid for 2026 and 2027, and ensure Ukraine gets the capabilities it needs and gets them fast. For this, European industry must simply deliver. And why? Because otherwise the money will go abroad to those industries who can. This is a European moment to show what it can do. Get ready to accept the challenge. I'm speaking here of adapting our defence industrial base to better support the defence of Europe with critical mass, economies of scale and deeper cross-border cooperation. Of security of supply, of cross-border cooperation, as well as collaboration between primes on the one hand and small and medium enterprises on the other. Of a greater sense of responsibility among industrial stakeholders for security and defence of our continent. There is also a need for more innovation, entrepreneurship and private financing. It is the EU's task to prepare the ground and to create the conditions, but it is the industry's task to deliver. If we are to reach that point of no return, it is critical to have broader sharing of risks and responsibilities among member states, politically as well as economically. With ReArm and SAFE, we have sent a clear signal of demand. Industry needs to take up that call. This also requires the strong support of European Defence Agency, the EU military staff, as well as the European Commission. Together, we must help to aggregate demand and encourage joint procurement so that industry can better predict how to make investment decisions. The third priority area I see is partnerships. First of all, NATO. 20 plus years ago, back when my country joined the EU, if NATO for that matter. All we had was what you will remember as Berlin Plus. This was the framework from 2003 that allowed EU to use NATO military assets for EU-led crisis management and operations in cases when NATO choose not to act. We have come a long way in the 10 years since that. First EU-NATO joint declaration in Warsaw. There is constructive leadership and close staff-to-staff cooperation. Moreover, Russia's full-scale war has led to unprecedented, previously unthinkable changes within the EU. For the first time, we are using our instruments intentionally, explicitly, aimed at achieving results to support the capability targets set by NATO allies, and with that, NATO's territorial defence and deterrence. Because the point is to make the 23 members we have in common stronger. We are all well aware of the political issues that have limited cooperation, but especially now, as the US setting its sights abroad and beyond Europe, NATO needs to become more European to maintain its strength, and for that, Europe must act. For example, we need to ensure that our security and defence initiatives remain complementary to NATO. For this, the ball is also in NATO's court. If we want to use EU instruments, such as our budgetary and regulatory power, to support and enable NATO, we have to know what these needs and targets are. The more information NATO provides, the better we can align. Here, those 23 countries that are members of both organisations bear a special responsibility and have a vested interest in ensuring coherence. In short, we need to sync our efforts together with NATO so as to complement each other and to demonstrate how distinct European pillar adds to the value through more burden sharing and military strength on our continent. That is on the NATO side, but more and more our bilateral partnerships are also becoming a valuable tool, not only in the security and defence, but also in the sense of broader foreign policy issues. Countries around the globe are looking for diversifying their partnerships to manage the heightened risk. I hear this every single time I travel and meet those countries in other regions. And when they search for a strong partner, more and more they also come to the European Union. We now have 9 specific security and defence partnerships. I just signed the 9th yesterday with India. For me, it is important that these are tailor-made arrangements that are operational with a focus of tangible takeaways that serve both sides, such as contributions to missions and operations on joint training, exercises, initiatives. The partnership could also be used for leverage key common security and defence policy goals, like support for Ukraine. We could turbocharge our collaboration with the selected like-minded partners. But we could also prioritise partners that are leaders in their regions in order to bolster the EU's position and narrative on the global stage. The 4th priority for action is how to make our political and military decision-making more fit for purpose, more responsive for the urgent situation we find ourselves in. Let's face it, Europe can be slow. Anonymity means we can not always act at the speed of relevance. Of course, there are policy differences among member states. This is all natural. But anonymity is also used by some as a bargaining tool, and it cannot be that one country's veto defines the policy for others. So we need to think about how to make our procedures more effective. We can take inspiration from the decades-long process by Justice and Home Affairs, moved from being a strictly member states' competence to communitarian one. We can explore the clauses within the treaties on topics like constructive abstention in the context of military and defence decisions. We should dare to also consider the Q word, meaning a gradual extension of the qualified majority in common foreign and security policy.